The rain hadn't come to Willow Glen in 207 days. The once bustling village on the edge of Montana's grassy plains now lay cracked and hushed, its fields brittle, its wells dry. Dust coated the windows of shuttered stores. Children no longer played barefoot under the cottonwoods. Everything felt abandoned, except for one tiny workshop, tucked behind a rusted toolshed near the village school. Inside, 13-year-old Ethan Carter hunched over wires, gears, and a solar panel salvaged from the roof of an old barn. His shirt clung to his back with sweat and determination, eyes squinting behind a pair of handmade goggles fashioned from soda bottles. He didn't notice the sun bleeding into orange outside, only the hum of possibility in his palms. Still trying to save the world. A voice teased gently from the open window. He turned and smiled. It was Ava Bennett, top of their class, daughter of the town's nurse, and the only person who didn't call him Dust Boy. She climbed in gracefully, brushing away the cobwebs from the sill. "You missed class again," she said, setting her backpack down. "Principal thinks you're giving up." "I'm not," Ethan replied, holding up a tangle of copper wire like a badge of honor. "I think I'm close. If I can get this turbine to convert humidity, even the little we have." Ava's face softened. "Ethan, you're brilliant, but this place, it's choking. People are leaving. My mom's already packed 2 bags. He looked down, jaw tightening. "We can't leave. This is our home." She reached for his hand, brushing it lightly. "Then let me help you save it." Outside, the wind whispered through dry leaves, an omen, or maybe a promise. Ethan Carter was born in Willow Glen, just like his father and grandfather before him. Once, the valley was known for its lavender fields, sweet corn harvests, and apple trees so full they bowed to the earth in August. But over the past 3 years, drought had drained the spirit from the land. Ethan's father, once a farmer with dirt-crusted hands and a laugh that echoed, now sat quietly on the porch, staring at the cracked soil with sunken eyes. His mother had left 2 winters ago to find work in Billings and never returned. School had become Ethan's only refuge, until even that began to slip away. Other kids mocked his patched clothes and his lunch of stale bread or nothing at all. He stopped answering questions in class. Stopped raising his hand. But he never stopped thinking. Especially about water. Ava Bennett was different. While most of the town had grown bitter with hardship, she remained kind. Her mother, Nurse Emily, was the village's last source of medicine and hope. Ava often walked to school barefoot to save her shoes for Sundays. Yet she shared her lunch with Ethan every day without making it seem like charity. "Mom says you've got something rare," Ava had said once, handing him half a peanut butter sandwich. "Like what?" he asked, licking the dry crust from his lips. "A mind that sees more than what is," she replied, simply. Ava's dream was to become an engineer, but the nearest scholarship required a working science project and a recommendation. "I can't build a future if there's no one left to write it," she often said, glancing out the window at the boarded-up stores and hollowed fields. Their friendship deepened not with grand declarations, but in quiet gestures, Ava sneaking him spare batteries from the clinic, Ethan fixing her cracked calculator with scrap metal and tape, both of them watching the sky for clouds that never came. Behind the school, Ethan found an old rain gauge, and beside it, a forgotten textbook about renewable energy. He devoured it page by page, reading by candlelight each night while his stomach grumbled. That's when the idea began to form. He thought about the condensation on the clinic windows in the early morning, the heavy air that sometimes clung to the valley at night, and the hot sun that burned during the day. There had to be a way to trap the moisture, store it, and use the heat as power. The crazy invention, as he called it, started with a broken fan, a few soda cans, and a lot of stubborn hope. It looked like a junkyard sculpture, until it started producing droplets. Just a few, but enough to stir something long dormant, belief. Yet not everyone shared that belief. At the town meeting last month, when Ethan tried to speak, the mayor waved him off. We need real solutions, not fairy tales, he said. The crowd murmured their agreement, too tired for hope. Even Ethan's father just ruffled his hair and said, maybe it's time we go too, son. Only Ava remained undeterred. You're not crazy, she whispered the day they sat under the scorched elm tree behind the school. You're a spark. Maybe this town forgot how to burn. But you didn't. That night, Ethan stayed in the shed long past midnight, Ava beside him, holding wires while he soldered circuits. When her fingers brushed his as they worked, neither of them pulled away. The next morning, the invention blinked to life. Not fully. Not yet. But the fan spun. The solar panel hummed. And for one moment, in the early dawn air, a single drop of water fell into the copper basin. One drop. A beginning. 3 days after the invention's first drop, Ethan and Ava had a decision to make. They could submit the design to a statewide science competition in Missoula. Winning could secure Ava a scholarship and Ethan a pathway out of Willow Glen, away from the dried-up fields, the empty cupboards, and the weight of a father too tired to dream anymore. But they both knew something deeper was at stake. This could save the whole village, Ava whispered, as they crouched together in the shed, watching the tiny basin collect its 5th drop that morning. But they won't believe it unless they see it. Ethan nodded, heart pounding. We need more power. More panels. Maybe some piping to route it to the cistern by the clinic. Ava looked at the broken bike in the corner, the only one she had. Her mother had saved for months to get it. Without a word, she stood up and wheeled it outside. What are you doing? Ethan asked, confused. Scrap metal, she replied. For the condenser. It's aluminum, right? Lightweight. Conductive. He stood, stunned. Ava, no. That's yours. She looked back at him, tears prickling her eyes but her voice firm. You're trying to save everyone, Ethan. The least I can do is help you get there. The next day, they tore the bike apart and rebuilt the condenser. Ava stayed up wiring while Ethan soldered. On the 3rd morning, when the sun hit the solar panel just right, a slow trickle began to fill the basin. It wasn't magic. It was engineering. A system that pulled vapor from the air during the night, stored it in makeshift tanks, and filtered it using layers of sand and charcoal. They called it the breath catcher. It produced just under a gallon of clean water a day, not enough to fill the wells, but enough to keep the clinic running. Enough to fill baby bottles and help Nurse Emily rehydrate the sick. Enough to make people believe again. And Ethan didn't charge them a cent. He could have patented the design. Sold it to companies. Left Willow Glen in a car with AC and never looked back. Instead, he gave the blueprint to the mayor. Handed it over without hesitation. Why? The mayor asked him in disbelief, eyeing the diagram. Why give this away for free? Ethan looked at Ava, then at the haggard faces of the townspeople gathered around the courthouse steps. Children clutched empty canteens. Mothers held babies too weak to cry. Because kindness is the only thing that's ever really kept this town alive, Ethan said. And maybe, love too. The mayor paused, stunned. Then nodded. That week, the townspeople, many of whom hadn't spoken in months, began building more breath catchers. Ava taught younger students how to solder. Farmers donated tubing and metal. Even Ethan's father, once lost in silence, came out to help weld the frame of a new unit beside the old barn. It was a slow miracle, one built with sweat, calloused hands, and compassion. Each gallon of water that trickled from those handmade machines wasn't just hydration, it was a promise. That even in the driest, most hopeless places, something good could grow. Late one evening, Ethan and Ava stood on the ridge, watching the lights flicker on in town, powered now by the same solar grid that fed the catchers. Ava turned to him, her face bathed in starlight. You know, she said softly, this still counts as a science project. Ethan chuckled. I thought we agreed not to submit it. Not for me, she said, stepping closer. For us. He looked into her eyes, heart full. I never would have done it without you. She smiled. I know. That's the best part. They stood there for a while, two kids wrapped in the quiet triumph of kindness. Below them, the village pulsed with a fragile, flickering life. And above, for the first time in months, a single cloud drifted across the moon. It started with a letter. 2 weeks after the first breath catcher went public, a journalist from Helena wrote a short feature titled, Boy Genius Revives Dying Village with Solar-Powered Invention. It ran on page 6 of the state newspaper. Ethan barely noticed it, too busy helping Mr. Collier install a new filtration barrel behind the town's library. But by the next morning, their world changed. The article had gone viral. Blogs, tech forums, and environmental groups shared it across platforms. People from across the country, and even from as far as Kenya and India, reached out, asking for the blueprint. They saw in Ethan's invention something more than utility. They saw hope. University professors called to invite him to speak. Engineers wanted to collaborate. But Ethan turned them all down, politely. Not out of pride, out of focus. There's more to do here, he told Ava, watching her explain condensation to a group of third graders. I don't want to chase the world until our own is fully standing. Willow Glen, for the first time in years, stood straighter. Within a month, there were over 40 breath catchers installed across town, one on the school roof, another behind the firehouse, and several behind the homes of elderly residents too frail to draw water themselves. Local crops slowly began to return. People who had packed their bags quietly unpacked them. Community dinners resumed. Laughter echoed down Main Street once more, riding on the wind like pollen in spring. Even Ethan's father began to change. Once a silent figure carved from grief, he started volunteering again. He helped Coach Rivera build a garden at the school using the new irrigation pipes, something Ethan never imagined he'd see. You brought him back, Ava said one afternoon as she and Ethan sat beneath the now blossoming elm tree. Not just Dad. Everyone. He shook his head. We brought them back. Ava smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Funny. Your invention was meant to save water. What about it? She turned to him, her voice soft. But it ended up saving love. Dreams. People. Ethan didn't reply. He just held her hand, the one that had once dismantled her only bike to help build something better. The one that never let go. Then came a new surprise. Ava received an envelope in the mail, a thick one with the seal of the American Renewable Energy Foundation. Inside was a full scholarship to their prestigious youth science program in Boston. The essay she'd submitted weeks ago, secretly, had moved their board to tears. She read it to Ethan on the back porch. It wasn't about the machine. It was about a boy who believed in helping others even when he had nothing. Who chose his dying town over fame. Who gave away an invention that could have made him rich, just to see his neighbor's crops grow again. It was always about you, she whispered. The night before she left, Ethan walked her to the edge of the valley. The wind was warm, scented with green and dust and life. She turned to face him, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I'll come back, she promised. I know, he replied, holding her pinky with his. And when you do, we'll build more. Not just machines. A life. They kissed, a first and gentle one, full of all the things they didn't know how to say yet. As Ava's bus rumbled down the road the next morning, the entire village gathered to wave goodbye. Ethan stood with his father, Nurse Emily, and dozens of people whose lives had been quietly rewritten by one boy's dream and one girl's belief in him. Weeks turned to months. The breath catcher design was open-sourced online. Villages across the U.S., from Arizona to Appalachia, built their own versions. Environmentalists cited Ethan's model in climate conferences. Rural schools added the Willow Glen Project to their curriculum. And back in Willow Glen, the fields began to bloom again. Lavender, sweet corn, apples, tentative at first, but real. At the center of it all, still humble, still working, stood Ethan. He kept Ava's last letter in his pocket, folded and soft at the edges. He read it often. It ended with 7 words. You didn't just catch breath. You gave it. Winter softened its grip the following year. Snow melted early in Willow Glen, uncovering rows of emerald green where nothing had grown in years. And on a Sunday afternoon, as sunlight stretched across the hills like golden arms, Ethan stood outside the schoolhouse, hammer in hand, installing the final panel of the new solar array. A familiar voice drifted up the dirt road. "You missed a spot, Professor." He froze. There, backpack slung over one shoulder and wind-tousled hair falling into her eyes, stood Ava. Older somehow, but still the same spark in her gaze, the same worn sneakers. The same girl who'd given him courage when he had none. "Ava," he whispered, the hammer slipping from his fingers. She crossed the distance between them in seconds and threw her arms around him. He caught her like breath, tight, stunned, whole. "You came back," he said, voice cracking. "I promised," she replied into his shoulder. When they pulled apart, she looked at the field behind him, where children now played under sprinklers. Where flowers grew in the same dirt that once cracked with despair. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," he replied. Still standing. "Because of us." They walked to the ridge, the place where dreams once felt impossible. Now, it shimmered with memory. Dozens of breath catchers dotted the valley below, their quiet, constant work a hymn of hope. Ava pulled out a folded piece of paper from her coat. "I brought something." It was an acceptance letter. To MIT. For both of them. "I mentioned your name in my interviews," she said. "They offered you a spot in their engineering incubator. Full ride." He took the paper, hands trembling. I can't just leave everything here." "You don't have to," she said, slipping her hand into his. "They want us to keep building. For places like Willow Glen. For the world." He stared at the paper, then at her. Then at the valley that had once been dry and broken, and now thrived because two kids had dared to care. "You really think we can do that?" "I know we can," she said. And so they made a plan. They'd leave in the fall. Until then, they'd teach every curious child in Willow Glen how to dream big, how to solder wires, how to read the sky like scripture. They'd train others to take over. Because hope, when built right, should never depend on one person alone. At the town's next harvest day, the mayor unveiled a bronze plaque beside the school garden. It read, "To Ethan Walker and Ava Lane. For reminding us that even the smallest spark, kindness, love, one crazy invention, can light the way home." Later that night, as lanterns glowed and laughter filled the air, Ethan and Ava sat on the porch of the rebuilt shed, fingers intertwined. He looked at her, his voice quiet. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't stopped that day to ask me what I was building?" She smiled. Every day. They watched the stars rise over a village once forgotten. Now reborn. And in that soft silence, love bloomed, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with certainty. A love forged in struggle, watered by kindness, and strong enough to change the world.